In the heart of Shinjuku, an S-rank gate had just appeared, sending waves of panic across Japan. As terror settled in, the nation's top hunters gathered at the Prime Minister's residence to discuss the impending crisis. The leaders of Japan's major guilds, Draw Swords, Phantoms, Invincible Kings, and Snowy Mountains, were all present. Among the murmuring association employees, whispers spread as Reiji Sugimoto of the Draw Sword Guild arrived, flanked by Minoru Hoshino, Atsushi Kumamoto, and Kanai Tawada. One employee mistakenly referred to Reiji as the Vice Guildmaster, only to be corrected. He had since risen to leader after Goto Ryuji's devastating loss in the Jeju Island raid. Speculation ran rampant. The loss of half of Draw Sword's S-rank hunters, coupled with Chairman Matsumoto Shigeo's underhanded dealings, had weakened the once dominant guild. Many saw this as an opportunity for other guilds to challenge their position at the top. Some even murmured that with Goto gone, Draw Sword's reign as Japan's strongest guild was nearing its end. Reiji and his team overheard the whispers, their steps momentarily pausing. A sharp glare from them was enough to silence the room. But before they could meet anyone's eyes, the gossiping employees had already turned their backs, pretending not to notice. Minoru was frustrated by the incident. He reflected on how no one would have dared to speak so boldly in front of them before. But now, with Goto gone, it seemed everyone had found their voice. Kanai added that rumors were circulating about a possible merger between the Phantom Guild and Snowy Mountain Guild. If true, their combined strength would give them 4 S-rank hunters, the same number as Draw Sword. Reiji scoffed at the idea, remarking that no matter how many guilds banded together, they still wouldn't match Draw Sword's true strength. Inside the Prime Minister's office, tension thickened. The Prime Minister slammed his fist against the table, furious. He demanded answers from the Japanese Hunters Association. Why had no solutions been presented? What was being done to prevent a dungeon break? Chairman Matsumoto, attempting to calm the storm, explained that even S-rank hunters were not guaranteed to survive an S-rank gate. The room erupted as one guildmaster snapped, arguing that there was no point in meetings anymore. The situation had already spiraled out of control, just like the Jeju raid. Another guild leader, recognizing the urgency, suggested a bold move, hiring the world's strongest hunter, Thomas Andre. His proposal was quickly shot down by another guildmaster who questioned whether Japan even had the funds to recruit someone of Thomas's caliber. Besides, with the sudden surge in high-level gates worldwide, every nation was struggling to hold its own. The Prime Minister, his worry deepening, doubted that many hunters would be willing to face such a perilous mission. The fear in the room was palpable. Then, Reiji spoke up. He mentioned that there was one hunter who would be willing to help, for the right price. That man was the barrier specialist, Yuri Orlov. Reiji took charge of the mission personally. Along with Minoru and Kanai, he traveled to Russia to negotiate with the one man who could keep Japan's S-rank gate under control, Yuri Orlov. Seated in a brightly lit room, Yuri barely spared them a glance as he swirled his drink. With an air of arrogance, he introduced himself, reminding the Japanese hunters of his reputation as the best support-type hunter in the world. After taking a slow sip, he got straight to the point. He had already reviewed the files sent by Draw Sword Guild. While he acknowledged their decision to evacuate civilians as the right call, he pointed out a glaring flaw, a lack of manpower. Yuri asked if it was true that Japan could only send 6 of their S-rank hunters on the mission. Reiji confirmed it. He explained that each had to leave 1 S-rank behind to handle the A-rank gates that had spawned across the country. Even Draw Sword could only afford to send 3 of its 4 S-ranks. Yuri chuckled, unimpressed. He pointed out that such a plan wouldn't be enough to protect Japan from the looming disaster. Shaking his head, he slammed his drink onto the table and made his offer clear: $10 million a day to keep the gate closed. Reiji was momentarily stunned by such an outrageous demand, but Yuri simply shrugged with a grin, saying it was a bargain compared to Thomas Andre, who would have charged $36 trillion for the mission. Minoru, standing just behind Reiji, turned to Kanai, asking what exactly Yuri had said. Kanai, fluent in Russian but shocked by the audacity, hesitated before muttering, "Whatever it wasn't good." Yuri exhaled in amusement, his smirk widening. He gave the Japanese hunters a choice: pay $10 million a day to save their country, or risk everything just to save a little money. Mocking their hesitation, he questioned whether they even had the luxury of being picky. Then, with a sneer, he added that even if they begged while licking his boots, it still wouldn't be enough. Frustrated by Yuri's arrogance, Reiji challenged him, asking if he truly believed his abilities justified such demands. Unfazed, Yuri scoffed and confidently claimed he was far superior to the two S-ranks standing behind Reiji, dismissing them outright as losers. Minoru and Kanai's blood boiled. They had been silently enduring Yuri's arrogance, but this was too much. They lunged forward, ready to put the Russian in his place, only to freeze mid-motion, locked in place by an unseen force. Yuri's smirk deepened as he watched their futile struggle. With a chuckle, he taunted them, daring them to move if they could. Minoru and Kanai were stunned. As seasoned S-rank hunters, they had faced countless powerful foes, yet now they couldn't even twitch a finger. How had Yuri managed to completely immobilize them with such ease? With a smug grin still on his face, Yuri turned back to Reiji and repeated his offer: to keep the S-rank gate sealed and, as a bonus, release the two hunters without any extra charge. Reiji remained still, carefully analyzing the situation. The Russians' power was undeniable. Even though the price was steep, Japan had no better option. Still clenching his fists from the humiliation, Reiji took a deep breath. After a brief moment of thought, he made his decision and reached out to the authorities. And just like that, the deal with Yuri Orlov was set in motion. While a dangerous crisis loomed over Japan, in neighboring Korea, Jin-Woo was in high spirits as he made his way back to the Ajin Guild office. His mind buzzed with thoughts of his rapid progress. His skills had evolved at an astonishing rate. Now, at level 101, he marveled at having obtained the key to the Kartanon Temple. And with level 102 just within reach, he couldn't help but anticipate what lay ahead. As Jin-Woo parked his car and stepped out of the vehicle, a familiar figure caught his eye near the office entrance. It was Hunter Cha Hai-in. The moment their eyes met, she quickly turned to leave, but Jin-Woo didn't hesitate. He sprinted after her. Startled, Hai-in froze as he suddenly appeared beside her. Narrowing his gaze, Jin-Woo asked why she was avoiding him and what she was doing near his office. Still surprised by his sudden approach, Hai-in explained that she had left her car in the parking lot during her last visit. Jin-Woo immediately recalled their last encounter, when they had used Shadow Exchange to leave. Understanding the situation now, he relaxed slightly. But before Jin-Woo could say anything else, Hai-in looked up at him, as if gathering her thoughts. Then, she hesitated for a moment, before asking if he was free right now. Hai-in's mind swirled with questions about the photo Jin-Woo had taken with Soo-yeon, about why he had chosen an A rank instead of hiring her, an S rank. But despite these thoughts, what truly weighed on her was something else, something far more important. Taking a breath, she finally opened up about the dream she had of Min Byung-gyu and how it was connected to Jin-Woo's powers. Jin-Woo's expression shifted. A sudden jolt ran through his mind. Sensing the gravity of the conversation, he gestured toward the office, inviting Hai-in to continue their discussion upstairs. Inside the office, Hai-in found herself momentarily flustered. She hadn't expected to be alone with him. Jin-Woo, however, remained focused. He casually made himself a cup of coffee before turning to Hai-in, inquiring how Min Byung-gyu had left a message for him. She recounted the strange events of that night, the eerie voice she had heard, and how Min Byung-gyu's shadow had manifested before her. His presence had felt urgent, almost desperate, as he warned her about the hidden danger within Jin-Woo. He spoke of feeling as though he had been revived solely to serve him. Yet, the most unsettling part was that he felt content in that servitude, as if it was his natural purpose. Byung-Yu's final words hinted at something even more terrifying: Jin-Woo's power, a force unlike anything else. Before his shadow could explain further and reveal the truth about Jin-Woo's army, a sudden light engulfed him, cutting off the message. His last words still echoed in Hyeon's mind, leaving her with an uneasy sense of foreboding. Hyeon's words clung to him, even as Jin-Woo resumed his usual routine. Seated in a dungeon while his shadow soldiers carried out the battle, his mind drifted. If what Hyeon had told him was true, then his powers weren't just about getting stronger. There was something deeper, something dangerous, and it was time to uncover the truth. As Jin-Woo was lost in thought, Jin-Ho took a nostalgic turn, reminiscing about their past and mentioning how the dungeon reminded him of their early days raiding C-rank dungeons. Jin-Woo, barely paying attention, simply reminded him not to talk with his mouth full as Jin-Ho ate. Undeterred, Jin-Ho suggested that Jin-Woo let his shadow soldiers handle everything while he focused on other matters, arguing that they could move on their own. But Jin-Woo knew better. He earned fewer experience points when he was too far away from his summons, and besides, he couldn't always trust his soldiers to behave properly when unsupervised. Shifting the conversation to a more serious note, Jin-Ho asked about Jin-Woo's sister, Jinna, and how she was recovering after that horrific event. Jin-Woo explained that she was still resting, but reassured himself that she was safe, knowing his most reliable shadow soldier was watching over her. Realizing he should check in, Jin-Woo closed his eyes and activated his new skill, Shared Senses, allowing him to see through the vision of his shadows. Through Beru's perspective, he saw Jinna sound asleep while his mighty summons stood beside her, deeply engrossed in a historical drama, speaking in a manner that was overly formal and dramatic. Amused, Jin-Woo decided to check on others as well. He suddenly heard the soft dripping of water. Focusing on the source, he was jolted by the realization that he had unintentionally glimpsed Hyeon in the bath. Jin-Woo's eyes flew open in shock, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. Jin-Ho, catching the odd reaction, asked if he had dozed off for a moment. Jin-Woo shook his head, quickly dismissing it as nothing, though a brief thought crossed his mind. Perhaps he should take Hyeon out for dinner as an apology. Before he could dwell on it, Jin-Ho broke the latest news, informing him about the S-rank gate that had recently appeared in Shinjuku and warning that if it wasn't cleared within 3 days, a dungeon break was inevitable. He then asked if Japan had reached out to Jin-Woo for the mission. Jin-Woo, already aware, confirmed that he had received the call but was still considering his options. There were more urgent matters at hand, and his decision wasn't immediate. As he spoke, Jin-Woo summoned the key to the Cardonon Temple from his inventory, his mind racing with unanswered questions about the system, his powers, and what it all truly meant. With only a day left before he could use the key, he knew the long-awaited truth was finally within reach. Pushing the thought aside, he turned to Jin-Ho, reminding him that if he was done eating, they still had work to do. Jin-Ho, lifting his backpack, nodded enthusiastically and followed Jin-Woo deeper into the dungeon. The next morning, Jin-Woo was ready in his hunter gear to head out of his apartment. His mother glanced at him over her shoulder, concern evident in her eyes as she asked if there was anything she needed to worry about. Jin-Woo quickly reassured her, telling her it was just an appointment and promising to return soon before stepping outside. As he walked, he summoned the black key once again, watching as a notification popped up, revealing the location where the key could be used. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Meanwhile, at Jinna's high school, a group of Hunter Association employees stood near another gate that had appeared in the exact same spot again. Jin-Woo, cloaked in stealth, approached quietly, unnoticed at first. One of the employees moved to stop him, but he calmly lowered his hood, revealing his identity. The female employee, the same one he recognized from the Red Gate incident, looked surprised as she informed him the gate had been open for 3 days. Jin-Woo's jaw tightened. The system had played him this time. He had assumed the location of the gate would only be disclosed today, but instead, it had already spawned days prior. Despite the gate being classified as C rank, something felt wrong. Jin-Woo turned to the employee and asked if any hunters had already entered. When she confirmed that an assault team had gone in 2 hours ago, Jin-Woo didn't hesitate. He told her to call them back immediately, warning that if they stayed inside, they would all die. The employee looked confused, alarmed even, questioning his urgency, but Jin-Woo ignored her, walking straight towards the gate, stating firmly that there was no time to explain. Inside the dungeon, the assault team gathered in front of what they assumed was the boss room, struggling to open the door. Something was off. As they debated their next move, Jin-Woo emerged from behind, halting them. His sudden appearance startled the group, who barely had time to register his presence before he stated that he was the survivor of the double dungeon and warned them of the danger they were in. The assault team exchanged bewildered glances, trying to process his words. Still, Jin-Woo advised them to leave immediately, declaring that from here on, he would take care of the gate. Ignoring their murmurs of disbelief, Jin-Woo stepped forward and examined the stone door blocking their path. It refused to budge. As he inspected it further, a notification appeared, informing him that the gate to the Cartenon Temple was locked and required the key to open. Summoning the key one last time, he pressed it into the stone, and with a heavy creak, the door began to open. The assault team stood frozen, stunned by how easily Jin-Woo had accomplished what they couldn't. Just as he was about to enter, one of the group members stepped forward, reminding Jin-Woo that the Dragon Guild had purchased the raid permit for this dungeon. Despite him being an S rank, they argued, he had no authority to take over. More voices joined in from behind, echoing their guildmates' concerns. Jin-Woo listened silently, watching their anxious expressions. He knew convincing them otherwise would be difficult, so he simply gave them a choice. He wouldn't stop anyone from entering the gate if they wished to go forward. One hunter, emboldened by the challenge, stepped past him and crossed the threshold. A notification flashed instantly. Access denied to individuals who do not possess the key. The words had barely registered before a monstrous doorkeeper swung its massive sword down, aiming straight for the hunter's head. Jin-Woo moved in an instant, yanking the hunter back just in time as the sword smashed into the stone tiles, shattering them. The squad members recoiled in terror, their gazes locking onto the crimson-eyed statue looming before them. Jin-Woo turned to the shaken hunter, asking if he still wanted to continue. He explained that every monster in this dungeon was just as dangerous, if not more. The reality of their situation settled over the group like a suffocating weight. Jin-Woo turned back to the rest of the assault team, warning them to leave the dungeon immediately and report to the Hunter Association that a double dungeon had appeared. Then, without waiting for their response, he stepped into the eerie chamber. A notification flashed. One who possesses the key has entered. The door slammed shut behind him, sealing the assault team outside. In Japan, the Russian S-rank hunter Yuri Orlov's plane finally arrived at the airport. As he walked towards the terminal, a massive crowd awaited him, cameras flashing as everyone eagerly tried to catch a glimpse. With a wide smile, Yuri greeted them all, reveling in the attention. Reporters rushed in, firing questions at him, the loudest one demanding to know how he planned on blocking off the S-rank gate. Exuding confidence as he stepped into the spotlight, Yuri simply explained that he would draw a large magic circle around the gate and pour his mana into it, creating a barrier strong enough to contain the magical beast. Skepticism rippled through the crowd as another reporter pressed him, asking if he could truly handle such a massive task alone. With a calm shrug, Yuri clarified that sustaining a barrier indefinitely by himself was beyond even his capabilities, but his magic circle had a solution. It would draw mana from its surroundings. By setting up large quantities of mana crystals around Tokyo, he assured, the circle would steadily absorb energy, strengthening over time. It was like starting a car, he added smugly. Once the engine was running, it would build up power on its own, transforming into an unbreakable wall. Lifting his chin, Yuri then made his bold declaration, reminding everyone that he was about to save their lives and that they should remember his name for it. Chairman Go Gun-hee watched the telecast unfold from his office, his fingers steepled as doubt lingered in his eyes. Yuri's confidence was undeniable, but the chairman wasn't entirely convinced of his ability to seal off such a powerful gate. If he failed, the consequences would be catastrophic, and Japan couldn't afford to gamble on empty promises. Turning to Jinchul, Chairman Go shifted the conversation, asking about Jinwoo's recent activities. Jinchul, prepared, handed over a list, explaining that Jinwoo had been keeping busy raiding gates in the capital. A chuckle escaped the chairman as he scanned the reports. He was amused by the sheer power of a one-man guild rivaling major organizations. It was nothing short of fascinating. Their discussion was cut short as Jinchul's phone buzzed. Seeking permission to step outside, he left the office to answer the call. As he listened, his usual composed expression faltered, his grip on the phone tightening. The caller's voice relayed urgent news. Another gate had opened at Jinna's school. But it wasn't just any gate. A double dungeon had been discovered inside. A panic surged through the Hunter Association, but Jinwoo remained undaunted as he stepped into the Kartanon Temple. The torches along the walls ignited upon his arrival, casting eerie shadows across the vast chamber. His eyes swept across the familiar sight. Towering statues lined the walls, their frozen gazes fixed forward, while at the far end of the hall, the largest of them all loomed on a stone throne, watching in silent judgment. Everything looked exactly as he remembered, yet something felt different. The stillness of the temple no longer unsettled him. It beckoned, whispering to a deeper understanding within him. He could sense it now, something he hadn't grasped before. These statues, these ominous figures that once struck fear into him, were neither living creatures nor magic beasts. They were mere puppets, empty husks tethered to a greater force. Jinwoo's sharp instincts latched onto the single presence in the room, something that concealed its monstrous nature beneath layers of stillness. His gaze locked onto one particular statue, its aura betraying it. Slowly he advanced, his voice cutting through the silence as he demanded to know if it was the one orchestrating everything. There was no response. The statue remained motionless. Irritation flickered across Jinwoo's face as he took another step closer. He knew it was there, knew it was watching him. His voice was cold now, sharper, as he questioned why it was refusing to answer. He was now face to face with the towering stone figure, a hooded angel with 6 wings, its hands clasping a massive stone tablet. Finally, its eyes flickered to life, glowing an ominous red as a slow smile crept across its face. A voice filled the chamber, welcoming Jinwoo with a chilling certainty. At last, he had arrived. A powerful rumble echoed through the chamber as the angelic statue unfurled its massive wings, sending a gust of wind sweeping across the temple. Dust and debris swirled in the air, but Jinwoo stood firm, his gaze locked on the being before him. Without warning, the stone tablet in its hands began to crack, fractures racing across its surface, until, in a violent motion, the statue smashed it to pieces. Jinwoo narrowed his eyes, watching the fragments scatter across the floor. Something about that act felt wrong. Muttering that maybe the commandments inscribed on it never really mattered in the first place, he took a step forward. The statue's lips curled into a knowing grin as it admitted that once they held meaning, but no longer. Jinwoo's expression darkened. So it was the one who had brought him here. The realization settled in, and he demanded confirmation. The chilling chuckle that followed made his skin crawl as the statue finally admitted that yes, it had called him to this place. Jin-Woo's stance remained firm as he questioned further, asking if it was a monster, but the statue simply clapped its hands, dismissing the question entirely. Instead of asking about its identity, it told him he should be questioning his own. The weight of those words pressed against him, but before he could dwell on them, movement flickered at the edges of his vision. The towering stone figures that lined the chamber, once frozen in place, were now shifting. The air grew thick with an oppressive force as the angelic statue declared the beginning of his final test, promising that if he remained standing by the end, he would be given the truth as a reward. Jin-Woo's instincts flared. Reaching for his shadow soldiers, he prepared to summon them, only for the statue to snap its fingers. A notification appeared in his vision, restricting all job-exclusive skills. Jin-Woo grit his teeth, understanding the message. This was a test for him alone. The statue watched him with amusement, reminding him that it was only interested in his strength, not that of his soldiers. Before Jin-Woo could respond, a massive stone figure lunged at him, its sword slicing through the air. His instincts screamed. Then it hit him. His inventory was still accessible. Without hesitation, he caught the descending blade with his bare hands, his grip tightening as cracks formed along its surface. With a sharp motion, he snapped it in two. Wasting no time, he grabbed one of the broken shards and hurled it forward. The jagged piece whistled through the air before piercing deep into the temple of the stone figure. But he wasn't finished. Leaping into the air, he twisted mid-motion and kicked the shard even deeper, shattering the figure's head entirely. Another statue advanced, an axe raised high. Jin-Woo met its strike head-on, his daggers flashing as he deflected the crushing blow. Without hesitation, he countered, his blade slicing clean through the axe handle before he leaped onto the figure's shoulders, his weapons carving through stone as he crushed its skull with a precise, devastating strike. Before he could land, an archer statue had already drawn its bow. The arrow tore through the air, but Jin-Woo moved faster. His dagger sliced the projectile in two mid-air. Without missing a beat, he kicked one of the broken halves with lethal force, sending it flying back toward its source. The makeshift projectile struck the archer's head, shattering it instantly. Jin-Woo didn't stop. His movements were fluid, calculated. He dodged, struck, and dismantled the statues one by one, their once overwhelming speed now nothing more than sluggish movements in his eyes. Every attack that once seemed unavoidable was now predictable. His heart surged with anticipation. This was the battle he had been waiting for. Across the chamber, the angelic statue trembled in delight. Watching Jin-Woo carve through the stone figures with ruthless efficiency, it marveled at his growth, at the sheer power he had attained. This was beyond what it had expected. Jin-Woo, however, paid it no mind. He was focused solely on the enemies before him. His daggers clashed against stone as he tore through them, their relentless assault becoming less of a challenge with every second that passed. But the angelic statue was not done. A deep, guttural rumble shook the temple, forcing Jin-Woo's eyes toward the far end of the hall. The colossal figure seated on the throne, which had remained motionless all this time, was finally stirring. Slowly, it gripped the armrests of its massive seat and rose, the sheer weight of its presence making the ground tremble. Each step it took sent violent tremors through the chamber, the very air seeming to bow to its overwhelming power. Then, its glowing red eyes snapped open. From its perch, the angelic statue let out a delighted laugh. With a voice laced in twisted amusement, it announced that the time had come to worship God. Undaunted, Jin-Woo surged forward with blinding speed, decapitating yet another stone figure with a swift slice from his daggers. Yet, no matter how many he cut down, their numbers constantly replenished. Glancing past the stone figures, he saw the statue of God standing tall, its eyes glowing an intense red. In a split second, he knew what was coming, the deadly heat vision. With no time to prepare, he abandoned his dagger for a moment and activated Commander's Touch. The skill yanked a few stone figures midair, pulling them into the line of fire just as the Colossus unleashed its beam. The attack struck with such force that the temple shook, vaporizing the statues into molten rubble. But the delay had been enough. Jin-Woo had leaped back in time, avoiding the brunt of the blast. As the heat and dust cleared, a notification flashed before him. Commander's Touch had been upgraded to its final form, Commander's Authority. His instincts screamed that even at his current level, a direct hit from that beam would be fatal. It was clear. If he wanted any chance of surviving this test, the Colossus had to fall first. He launched himself forward. The statue of God tracked him, its massive foot rising before slamming down, cracking the floor with a deafening sound. A sinister smile crossed its face, certain it had crushed him. But Jin-Woo's speed was beyond its comprehension. The foot struck empty ground as he weaved past, propelling himself upward with explosive force. The Colossus's eyes locked onto him again, preparing another beam. But Jin-Woo had already formulated a plan. If he combined his speed with his newly upgraded skill, he could strike from its blind spot. Channeling Commander's Authority, he yanked himself toward the Colossus's shoulder. The red beam fired instantly, but veered off target as the giant lost its balance, sending tremors rippling across the battlefield. The gravitational pull from his skill dragged Jin-Woo toward the Colossus. Even at its enormous size, it couldn't resist the force. Now right beside its eerie face, Jin-Woo gripped his daggers and activated Mutilation, slashing at its stone surface. Yet the blades barely left a mark. The Colossus smirked, mocking his efforts. Realizing his daggers were useless, Jin-Woo shifted tactics. His eyes locked onto a deep crack on the statue's face. Without hesitation, he leaped onto it, grabbing hold as he funneled a tremendous amount of mana into his arms, his fist clenched, glowing with raw power, before he delivered his first punch. The impact sent a shockwave through the temple. The Colossus's face distorted slightly from the sheer force of the blow. The angelic statue watching from afar flinched in surprise. It had never anticipated such a direct, brute force approach against its perfect creation. Jin-Woo didn't stop. Strike after strike, he hammered into the Colossus's face, his relentless assault echoing like thunder. Each punch carried the weight of his growing strength, his fury fueling every blow. He was determined to show what the power of a level 101 hunter truly looked like. Then, with one final devastating strike, the Colossus staggered before crashing to the floor, sending tremors through the lair. As the dust settled, Jin-Woo stood unscathed amidst the destruction. But the battle wasn't over. The remaining stone figures lunged at him, seizing the opportunity. Before they could reach him, he activated Commander's Authority. Instantly, their heads slammed into the ground, immobilized. A moment of silence followed, the ground trembling before everything went still. Jin-Woo clenched his fists, feeling the power surge through him. He had grown even stronger. Across the chamber, the angelic statue clapped, impressed by his triumph. Narrowing his eyes, Jin-Woo demanded answers, but instead of an explanation, a hollow, chilling laugh filled the room. The test wasn't over. A sudden notification flashed before his eyes, an urgent quest carrying an ominous message that sent a chill down his spine. The angelic statue's voice cut through the silence. It was Jin-Woo's final test. The message was clear. If he failed to defeat the enemy in front of him within 10 minutes, his heart would stop beating. The seconds ticked away. Frustration rising, Jin-Woo demanded once more to know who the angelic statue truly was. Grinning, the statue's stone face began to crumble. As the dust settled, its true identity was revealed. It was the architect of the system itself. Outside the double dungeon, Chief Wu Jinchul and his surveillance team arrived at the location. The moment he stepped closer, a suffocating wave of magic power poured from the gate, warping the air itself. Jinchul froze. The sheer intensity of the mana storm sent a deep chill through his body, his instincts screaming at him to retreat. His breath hitched as he forced himself to speak, muttering about the overwhelming aura. It wasn't just dangerous, it felt monstrous, unlike anything he'd encountered before. He turned to his team, his voice sharp, as he demanded to know if any major guilds were nearby. A subordinate quickly confirmed that the Hunters Guild remained on standby, with both of their S-rank hunters ready to mobilize at a moment's notice. Jinchul didn't hesitate. Recognizing the scale of the threat, he barked an order to send an emergency request for cooperation. They needed reinforcements, now. As the final test commenced, the architect stretched out his wings, morphing them into hands. Jin-Woo watched closely, standing face to face with the orchestrator behind the system. The air between them crackled with tension, heavy with the anticipation of battle. A smirk crossed the architect's face before he lunged forward at blinding speed. Jin-Woo barely registered the movement before a crushing force struck him. He braced himself, but the impact sent him hurtling across the chamber, slamming into the stone wall with a sickening crunch. Blood trickled from his mouth as the architect wasted no time, launching another strike. Jin-Woo barely twisted away, the architect's fist missing him by mere inches. Jin-Woo hardly had time to breathe before a relentless barrage of attacks rained down upon him. The sheer force of the blows shattered the floor, while the architect grinned, reveling in the onslaught. Yet, even as the architect pressed its advantage, Jin-Woo adapted. His hands moved with blinding speed, blocking, deflecting, and countering. His sharp gaze locked onto his foe, unwavering even in the midst of overwhelming aggression. The architect's expression flickered with surprise. Jin-Woo was exceeding expectations. Then, suddenly, a brutal jab crashed into Jin-Woo's jaw, snapping his head back. The architect prepared to follow up, convinced he had him on the ropes, but fiery determination ignited in Jin-Woo's eyes. With all his strength, he countered with a devastating punch to the architect's face, blasting him backward. The architect recovered swiftly, landing gracefully, yet something had changed. A slow grin spread across his face. He was amused. For the first time in his existence, the architect had encountered a human who could truly stand against him. Blood dripped into Jin-Woo's eye, partially obscuring his vision, but his thoughts remained razor-sharp. The architect had summoned him here as soon as he reached level 101, assuming he wouldn't be a match, but Jin-Woo knew otherwise. He had the power to take the architect down. Determined, Jin-Woo pressed for answers, demanding to know why the architect had created the system and why he had been chosen as its player. The architect, intrigued by Jin-Woo's defiance, moved swiftly to strike again. Realizing close combat put him at a disadvantage, Jin-Woo backed away, activating Commander's authority to launch a counterattack. But his assault met an unexpected resistance. The architect wielded the very same skill. Their powers clashed mid-air, gravitational force tearing through the battlefield, shattering the ground beneath them. Jin-Woo's eyes widened as he realized that the architect could use the same abilities as him. That meant long-range attacks were futile. He needed a new strategy. The architect, now with all 8 arms outstretched, spoke with eerie finality, asserting that his own demise would make no difference, that the outcome had already been decided. Suddenly, weapons scattered across the chamber trembled, rising into the air. An ominous energy crackled around them as they floated toward the architect, aligning perfectly in his grasp. As each of his 8 hands gripped a different weapon, the architect stated that the answers Jin-Woo sought had been predetermined from the very beginning, and that, no matter what, he would come to know the truth. Jin-Woo tightened his grip on his daggers, demanding to know how the architect had created such a powerful system and how he had gained such immense abilities. The architect, now brandishing his weapons, stated that he had never chosen Jin-Woo in the first place. In fact, he had opposed the idea entirely. He was merely the designer and overseer of the player breeding system. Less than 7 minutes remained. Time was slipping away, and Jin-Woo knew he had no choice but to end this now. The architect, sensing the urgency as well, prepared to unleash his full power for the final stretch. In a blur, he soared into the air before crashing down in front of Jin-Woo with a force that shook the ground. Armed with 8 different weapons, the architect unleashed a relentless flurry of attacks. Each strike sent shockwaves through the chamber, the deafening impact echoing as blades and hammers tore into the ground and walls around Jin-Woo. Yet amid the chaos, something within Jin-Woo shifted. His instincts sharpened, his movements growing more precise with every passing second. Even with one eye impaired by blood, he saw the patterns, reading the attacks before they landed. The architect moved with incredible speed, but Jin-Woo, despite the storm of attacks surrounding him, weaved through the barrage with an uncanny ease. The architect was taken aback. He had unleashed his full force, yet Jin-Woo was not only blocking his blows, but also counterattacking with relentless precision. With every passing moment, Jin-Woo's speed increased, his strike sharper, his movements more fluid. Before the architect could even comprehend what was happening, Jin-Woo's blade sliced through the air, severing one of his arms in a clean, merciless strike. The architect staggered back, a pained groan escaping his lips. He couldn't believe it. Jin-Woo had managed to wound him, even though he resided within a mere imitation of a body. His eyes narrowed as he studied the hunter, realization dawning upon him. Within Jin-Woo, there existed a fragment of something far greater, something that allowed him to stand against forces beyond human comprehension. Yet Jin-Woo remained calm, his unwavering gaze locked onto his opponent. The architect, filled with rage and disbelief, let out a furious bellow. He couldn't fathom how a human could defy him in such a way. In desperation, he summoned the remaining stone figures to attack. Even those with shattered heads and broken limbs began to rise, their fractured forms obeying his will. Time was running out. Just over 3 minutes remained. Wasting no time, Jin-Woo leaped forward and activated his skill Commander's Authority once again. Landing in the midst of the statues, he sent them flying backward. Then, he dashed through the chaos, narrowly avoiding the massive fist of the Colossus before cutting down another stone figure with a swift slash of his daggers. The gap between him and the architect was closing rapidly. In a blur of motion, Jin-Woo's blade struck again, severing another arm from the architect, making him roar in fury. Desperate, the architect swung his sword with full force, the blade barely grazing Jin-Woo. Before Jin-Woo could regain his footing, another devastating impact slammed into his back. A shield, wielded by one of the statues, crashed into him with bone-rattling force. Gritting his teeth, Jin-Woo turned his gaze to the culprit. It was the same statue from his first expedition into the double dungeon, the one that had nearly ended his life. A surge of fury erupted within him. With less than 3 minutes left, he launched himself into the air, descending with a brutal elbow strike that shattered the statue's head into dust and rubble. Fueled by vengeance, Jin-Woo sprinted toward the architect, who could do nothing but watch in disbelief. In a flash, he slashed again, severing more of the architect's arms. The lair trembled under the force of the battle as the architect crashed to the ground. As the dust settled, Jin-Woo stood over the fallen architect, his dagger pressed against his throat. 2 minutes remained. With a heavy breath, the architect finally admitted defeat, declaring that the final test had come to an end. But Jin-Woo wasn't done. It was time for the answers he had been seeking. The architect, however, merely lifted a trembling finger and pointed directly at Jin-Woo, stating that everything he had been searching for was already within him. Jin-Woo's brow furrowed in confusion, but before he could press further, A system notification flashed before his eyes, asking if he wished to retrieve the data stored in his memory. The architect locked eyes with him, making it clear that the choice was Jin-Woo's alone. Thoughts surged through his mind as he grappled with the idea of data hidden within him. After a brief hesitation, he steeled himself and accepted the system's prompt. In an instant, radiant light erupted around him, engulfing him in its brilliance. The world around him twisted, and suddenly, Jin-Woo felt himself being hurled through an endless tunnel at an unfathomable speed, as if time and space had lost all meaning. The sensation was overwhelming, yet familiar, like returning to a place he had long forgotten. Jin-Woo gasped at the breathtaking spectacle before him. Beneath his feet stretched an endless army of monstrous creatures, their ranks so vast they seemed to extend beyond the horizon. Every species imaginable, high orcs, ice elves, goblins, giants, stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked onto something in the sky above. Following their gaze, Jin-Woo lifted his head. Suspended high above was an enormous jet-black gate, looming like a celestial void against the eerie purple sky. It exuded a menacing aura, as though sealing something terrifying beyond its threshold. Jin-Woo's breath caught in his throat. This was not Earth. The realization hit him hard. If these creatures ever crossed into his world, humanity would be annihilated. Yet, something told him the monsters weren't focused on Earth. They were preparing for something else. Then, it happened. A deafening crack split the silence as fractures spread across the surface of the gate. With a final, ear-shattering rupture, it burst open, revealing what lay beyond. From the void emerged legions of silver-armored warriors, their radiant wings unfurling as they flooded into the sky like divine retribution. If the monsters blanketed the earth, these celestial soldiers eclipsed the heavens, forming an endless tide of light and steel. It didn't take long for Jin-Woo to grasp what was about to unfold. The silver-armored soldiers in the sky raised their majestic horns, and an earth-shaking blast echoed across the battlefield. What followed was a war of unimaginable scale and intensity. The two opposing forces, both radiating raw hostility, clashed just above the ground. But the outcome became clear almost immediately. The silver-clad soldiers overwhelmed their monstrous foes in an instant. Wave after wave of their ranks advanced like an unrelenting storm, cutting through the monstrous horde and reducing them to nothing but lifeless husks. It was an overwhelming display of power, one that left no doubt as to who the victors would be. And then suddenly, everything changed. Just as the Silver Army was on the verge of totally annihilating their nemesis, they all came to a sudden, eerie halt. Their collective attention drawn to something ominous, stirring in the distance. A dark shadow spread across the battlefield, swallowing the reddish-brown land beneath it. A suffocating stillness took hold, until a single word shattered the silence. Arise. The moment the command was spoken, a ripple of dark energy surged outward, devouring the battlefield in an abyss of writhing shadows. The blood-soaked earth became a sea of blackness as something unfathomable emerged from the darkness. Jin-Woo's eyes widened. He knew this power. His gaze darted toward the source of the command. There, atop a warhorse wreathed in black energy, stood a towering knight clad in jet-black armor. The strands of dark aura rising from him were so thick they seemed almost alive. The Shadow Monarch had arrived. As if answering their sovereign's call, an endless legion of shadow soldiers erupted from the darkness. The battlefield, once painted with the blood of slain monsters, had now transformed into a nightmarish expanse of reborn warriors standing at their master's command. Jin-Woo's breath hitched as he took in the spectacle. The sheer magnitude of the Shadow Monarch's power, his ability to summon an infinite army, left him awestruck. Compared to this force, even his own skills seemed insignificant. And then, with a flash of silver, the battle resumed. the silver-armored soldiers descended upon the shadow soldiers like lightning, clashing with newfound ferocity. But this time, they did not cut through their enemies as effortlessly as before. The battlefield erupted into chaos once more, the two armies now evenly matched. Explosions ripped through the air, the ground cracked under the relentless force of battle, and the very atmosphere quivered under the weight of the war. What had once been a one-sided slaughter had transformed into an apocalyptic showdown, all because of the arrival of a single, all-powerful being. The flow of the war shifted instantly when the Shadow Monarch entered the fray. The battlefield, once dominated by the radiant silver-armored soldiers of the sky, now quaked under the force of a singular presence. The black horse carrying the monarch thundered forward, its hooves shattering the blood-stained ground beneath it. With each sweep of his sword, thousands of enemy troops fell, their bodies dissolving into darkness. A single flick of the monarch's hand sent the soldiers of the sky flying backward, their pristine wings fracturing like brittle glass as they plummeted back to the ground. Jin-Woo, watching through the monarch's eyes, immediately recognized the technique, commander's authority. It was a power he himself possessed, but never had he seen it wielded with such devastating efficiency. The Shadow Monarch carved a path of destruction, sweeping through the battlefield like an unrelenting storm. For the first time since the war began, the Silver Army faltered. Yet just as the Shadow soldiers began to gain ground, an ominous wind howled across the battlefield. The monarch paused, turning his gaze away from the battle. Jin-Woo, still bound to his vision, followed suit. In the distance, two colossal gates materialized, their sheer size rivaling those suspended in the sky. From their gaping maws, two armies poured forth, one composed of monstrous, beast-like creatures led by a wolf the size of a mountain, and the other of heavily armored knights, their banners bearing the insignias of the noble clans from the demon's castle. Among them, Jin-Woo spotted the familiar crest of Ezel's clan. The battlefield, already drenched in carnage, now teetered on the brink of further chaos. The new arrivals wasted no time, encircling the Shadow Monarch's forces. Jin-Woo's confusion deepened. Why had the demons joined this fight? They had no stake in this war between the silver soldiers and the monstrous horde. What did they stand to gain? Before he could make sense of it, the demons and beasts charged. The shadow soldiers, unyielding as ever, fought back. But for every soldier they lost, the enemy's numbers seemed endless. Jin-Woo's mind raced. Was the Shadow Monarch not on the same side as these creatures? Or was this a betrayal from within? The battlefield descended into further ruin, the ground torn asunder by battle. The monarch, now without his mount, stood firm at the heart of the chaos. His dark armor gleamed under the eerie light as he finally reached his true opponent, a lone demon slumped against a jagged rock formation, breathless and battered. Though the demon's face remained obscured by its helmet, the Shadow Monarch's piercing gaze revealed his recognition. He demanded an answer, his voice cold, asking why he had been betrayed. Why, when they could have ended the war together, the demon had chosen this path. The demon trembled, but slowly lifted its head. In a weak yet unwavering tone, it responded that it was a shame they couldn't end him instead. The monarch's expression hardened, his hand extended, dark energy surging forth as the demon was pulled toward him, his throat clenched in an unyielding grip. The metal of the demon's armor groaned under the pressure, but still, he spoke. Even as his breath waned, his words did not falter. Then, with a final mocking laugh, the demon uttered something in a language long forgotten. The monarch's grip tightened. His thumb crushed into the demon's throat with a sickening crunch. That was precisely the moment when the Shadow Monarch's gaze locked with the demon's eyes, glaring back from within the helm. Jin-Woo, still witnessing through the monarch's perspective, recognized that seething rage. Startled by the realization, he let go of the demon's lifeless body, which crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. His gaze drifted to the fallen demon. Hesitantly, he stepped forward and removed the battered helmet. The metal clattered to the ground, revealing a face he had seen once before, on the top floor of the demon's castle. It was Baran, the Demon King. Jinwoo's breath hitched. His mind reeled. But before he could fully process the revelation, another realization struck him like a thunderbolt. He looked down at himself, at the armor now clad over his form. It wasn't his own. From an unknown moment in time, he had taken control of the Shadow Monarch's body. His heartbeat quickened, each thud echoing louder than the last, pounding against his ribs like war drums. As his hand moved instinctively to his chest, his fingers trembled. There it was. Not one, but two hearts, pulsing in perfect unison, their rhythm intensifying until it drowned out everything else. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, his gaze lifted to the sky. Descending from above, their 6 wings spanning wide, were 4 celestial beings, their divine forms shrouded in blinding light. Their presence loomed ominously over Jinwoo, casting a heavy weight on his shoulders. Then, a soft chime echoed in his mind. The system's notification rang out, confirming that the playback of the retrieved data had come to an end. In the meantime, the elite hunters from the Hunters Guild and the Association, led by Choi Jong-in and Woo Jin-chul, arrived at the entrance of the double dungeon gate. As they approached, a thick tension gripped the air. The overwhelming mana that surrounded the place was unlike anything they had encountered before. Among the group, Hunter Cha Hai-in observed the eerie surroundings, silently noting that the mana permeating the area didn't belong to Jinwoo. Her curiosity only grew as the team rushed past the massive doorway. Inside, what awaited them was beyond comprehension. Countless shattered stone statues lay strewn across the chamber floor. Their remains had piled into small hills. Jinchul's heart began to race wildly as he remembered the testimonies of survivors from the previous double dungeon incident. Everything they had described was real. The statue of God, the stone figures, all of it. As they took in the ruinous sight, a deep, booming voice echoed around them. The architect had risen. Tattered wings hung behind him, and only one of his arms remained. His glowing eyes swept across the intruders with disdain as he muttered menacingly that he hadn't invited any humans here. The hunters were stunned to hear a monster speaking their language, but the architect raised a finger to his lips and silenced them, warning them not to disturb the king's slumber. The mention of a king made the hunters glance toward the far corner of the room, where Jinwoo stood silently, almost as if in a deep sleep. He was frozen in place, unaware of his surroundings. Myung-chul recognized Jinwoo instantly from a distance, but before he could react further, a brutal attack struck him and 2 other hunters in half. Hae-in's eyes widened in panic as she witnessed the shocking scene unfold. The architect stepped forward with a grin, declaring that these strong humans would make the perfect first offerings to the king. Fear swept through the group. In a desperate bid to save Myung-chul, the group's healers rushed in under Choi Jong-in's urgent orders, pouring all their power into reviving him while the wounded were dragged to safety. But something worse was coming. The shattered statues began to stir. One by one, the stone warriors started standing up. Soon, the most terrifying of them all, the statue of God, stood upright, glaring at the hunters as the architect's voice echoed ominously around the chamber. He taunted that anyone who survived until all of his puppets had fallen would be given the chance to witness the glorious rebirth of the king. Just as the words left his mouth, the Colossus' eyes lit up, charging a deadly laser. Choi Jong-in screamed at the top of his lungs for everyone to get down, and they narrowly avoided the laser, which sliced just above their heads. Then, skidding past the Colossus, Jong-in unleashed a powerful fire spell, engulfing the towering stone figure in flames. The explosion rocked the chamber, momentarily distracting their enemies. Jinchul seized the moment and hurled himself forward, winding up a crushing punch. His gauntlet connected with one of the statues, delivering a thunderous impact, but the figure didn't even crack. It was tougher than anything he'd ever faced. Before he could react, a shockwave blasted him across the room. Jong-in screamed again, warning Jinchul that the statues were highly resistant to physical attacks and spells. Other guild members quickly confirmed this, as their attacks had no effect. The statues remained completely unfazed. Quickly assessing the situation, Jong-in realized they were running out of options. His eyes locked onto Jin-Woo, knowing their only hope lay in waking him. Taking a drastic measure, he fired a fireball directly at Jin-Woo, hoping it might break whatever trance he was trapped in. But to his surprise, the architect suddenly stepped in front of the projectile and absorbed the explosion with his own body. Enraged that someone dared interrupt the king's slumber, the architect lunged at full speed toward Jong-in, aiming to strike him down. Before the attack could land, 3 hunters rushed past and intercepted the blow, blocking the architect's assault with sheer force. Seeing an opening, Jinchul urgently instructed Hyen to wake Jin-Woo while the rest of the team handled the chaos. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Hyen sprinted toward Jin-Woo, who still stood motionless, caught in a deep and unbreakable sleep. But before she could reach him, the architect stepped into her path, blocking her way. Amused by Hyen's determination, he taunted her to push beyond her limits, prompting her to launch into her most powerful skill, sword dance. The architect seemed delighted, easily blocking her flurry of attacks without breaking a sweat. Hyen struggled to keep pace with his speed until a strike sliced through her arm, drawing a scream of pain. Unimpressed, the architect smirked and boasted about the system he built, one that could predict and respond to every possible outcome. He mocked the hunters, claiming none of them were capable of breaching his creations. He hadn't even finished his taunt when a fireball blasted across his face. Jong-in, exhausted but resolute, reminded everyone that their goal was to wake up Sung Jin-Woo. Despite her injured arm, Hyen launched forward again. The architect extended his arm, trying to grab her, then swung his sword with devastating force. She narrowly dodged the strike, which slammed into the ground and left a deep scar. Impressed, the architect grinned, until he suddenly flinched. He noticed a trace of a shadow soldier within Hyen's shadow. Though it couldn't fully manifest due to the dungeon's rules, its presence was undeniable. Intrigued, he questioned her about the shadow's origin and her connection to Jin-Woo. Gasping for breath, Hyen declared she was Jin-Woo's friend and had come to rescue him. The architect, amused by her determination, offered her a grim gift. She would witness the descent of one of the greatest monarchs, but only after every one of her companions lay dead. Before he could make good on his threat, a sudden voice cut through the chamber, and a rock-solid punch from Jin-Woo slammed squarely into the architect's face. Jin-Woo had finally awakened from his slumber, demanding answers from the fallen architect. Looking down at him, Jin-Woo, feeling a surge of unfamiliar power, raged as he asked what the architect had done to his body. Jinchul and Hyen stood frozen in shock, while Jong-in exhaled in relief at seeing Jin-Woo awake. Jin-Woo's anger surged as he further stomped the architect into the ground. Howling in disbelief, the architect couldn't understand why Jin-Woo was conscious instead of the king, or how he had awakened despite the Black Heart's influence. Hearing that name, Jin-Woo's mind raced as he now realized where the irrational mana levels within him came from. A sudden notification appeared before his eyes. He had fulfilled the requirements for the title Demon Hunter. With it, he received the mystical Black Heart, granting him a staggering increase of 100,000 to his mana capacity. Yet something didn't add up. Jin-Woo observed the architect closely, deducing that the Black Heart wasn't his doing, and certainly not intended to benefit Jin-Woo. Despite the data retrieved, the system had yet to provide all the answers. He recalled that the architect had opposed his selection as a player, yet Jin-Woo still didn't understand what being a player truly meant, or what had been planned for him. With narrowed eyes, he pressed the architect for answers. Before he could continue, the architect snapped, identifying Jin-Woo as the Shadow Monarch and warning that the other monarchs would never tolerate what had just occurred. Jin-Woo, with no patience left, summoned every dagger from his inventory. The weapons pulsed with mana as they hovered ominously around him, his demand for answers pressing down like a storm. Even in his peril, the architect laughed darkly, hinting at a deeper reason behind Jin-Woo's selection. But chaos erupted before he could say more. The other hunters began to panic as the stone statues reanimated. The architect chuckled at the panic and reminded Jin-Woo that his puppets would keep attacking even if he died. Smirking, Jin-Woo coldly threatened to kill the architect and then the puppets afterward. When the architect attempted to argue that Jin-Woo would return to being an E-rank hunter upon his death, Jin-Woo cut him off, asserting that the system wouldn't collapse with the architect's demise. The architect, stunned, realized Jin-Woo had seen through his bluff. At that moment, the system pinged repeatedly as Jin-Woo attempted to take over. The architect froze in disbelief. His access was denied again and again. Jin-Woo stood his ground. He understood the mutual dependency between himself and the system. It needed him just as much as he needed it. With a chilling stare, he declared that he would devour the system entirely if needed. He then taunted the architect, claiming the system he'd built wasn't so flawless after all. Furious, the architect lunged, but Jin-Woo's dagger tore through him first. The architect's face split in two as his body collapsed. In his final moments, he uttered a grim prophecy: when the pillars of fire that uphold the heavens rise, an inescapable death will descend upon Jin-Woo. As his voice faltered and his body disintegrated, Jin-Woo stood tall, his eyes steely and unshaken, coldly stating that he'd be waiting. It had been about an hour since the Hunters Guild had gone in, and the tension outside the dungeon had grown heavier with each passing minute. Bravery Guild remained on standby, their members growing increasingly impatient. Eyes remained fixed on the gate, hoping for any sign of movement. Then, finally, the first glimpse of the returning hunters appeared. Young-in and Jinchul emerged from the gate, leading what remained of the Hunters Guild. Their faces were haggard, their bodies battered and bruised, not a single smile among them. The Bravery Guild members stood frozen, overwhelmed by the devastation before them. It was hard to believe that such ruin had come from a C-rank dungeon. Jinchul stepped forward, his voice low but steady as he addressed the Bravery Guild members, asking them to help carry out the bodies of the deceased. A moment later, Jin-Woo stepped out. He didn't speak. His eyes were distant, his mind lost in thought. The architect was gone. But so many questions still lingered in his head, questions the system hadn't answered. Jinchul walked up to him, his expression grim as he relayed the casualties. Nearly 20 top-ranked elite hunters had lost their lives inside the dungeon. He took a moment to acknowledge Jin-Woo's bravery, remarking that if this had escalated into a full-scale dungeon break, the devastation would have been beyond imagination. Jin-Woo listened silently before responding, his voice barely above a whisper as he thanked the Hunters Guild and the Monitoring Division. He admitted that he wouldn't have made it out alive without their help. Jinchul, however, was puzzled. He looked at Jin-Woo curiously, asking how he even knew to investigate this specific gate in the first place. Jin-Woo met his gaze, eyes somber as he revealed the truth. The dungeon had summoned him. Jinchul blinked, trying to understand, but in the end, he didn't question it further. The horrors he had witnessed were enough to make him believe anything. Before either could say more, Hei-in approached them, her expression filled with concern. She asked if Jin-Woo was all right, her eyes scanning him for injuries. Jin-Woo offered a small nod, saying he was fine, just tired. But as the words left his mouth, his knees gave out from under him. He collapsed to the ground without warning. Jinchul and the other hunters rushed to his side, calling out his name in desperation, their voices filled with urgency as they tried to rouse him. Jin-Woo was urgently rushed to the hospital, while far from him, a different kind of storm was brewing. A private meeting had been called at the Korean Hunter Association headquarters. Inside a secured conference room, Japan's Hunter Association chairman, Matsumoto, sat across from President Go. The tension was thick as Matsumoto slid a document across the table, stating that Japan was willing to give up all rights to the monocrystals on Jeju Island, a resource valued in the billions. President Go raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the proposal. When he asked why Japan would surrender something so valuable, Matsumoto gave a measured nod and confessed they wanted to hire Jin-Woo. All they needed was the association's help in arranging a meeting with him. As President Go glanced down at the enormous monetary figures outlined in the proposal, it became clear to him Japan was desperate. He speculated silently that their urgency had something to do with the newly emerged S-rank gate in Tokyo. With Goto Ryuji gone, Japan had no one left capable of handling such a threat. He kept his expression neutral and set the document aside. Then, in a more serious tone, he requested they continue the conversation in private. Once both assistants had stepped out, President Go's demeanor shifted. Calmly but firmly, he warned Matsumoto that if this was another one of his notorious schemes, he should back off before it was too late. Matsumoto blinked in disbelief at the accusation, clearly caught off guard. President Go didn't stop there. He revealed that he had heard rumors, whispers that the Blade Guild, once tightly under Matsumoto's thumb, had recently severed ties with the Japanese Association. Matsumoto stood up, eyes narrowing, as he asked how the Korean president could possibly know that. But President Go, unmoved, simply replied that it wasn't hard to figure out. Without Goto, the Blade Guild was fracturing, and the internal power structure within Japan's Hunter Association was crumbling with it. Matsumoto's offer to hire Jin-Woo wasn't just strategy, it was survival. Then, without a hint of hesitation, President Go pulled out a small camera device. Its design was unmistakable. It was the same kind used by Goto's team during the Jeju Island raid. He held it up just long enough for Matsumoto's face to pale before setting it on the table. His voice dropped to a growl as he asked if Matsumoto had really believed his scheme would remain hidden. Matsumoto was at a loss, realizing there was no more room to maneuver now that the truth had come to light. President Go continued, unrelenting. He warned that if this information were ever made public, the fallout would devastate not only Matsumoto's reputation, but all of Japan's remaining stability. Then, slowly curling his fingers into a fist, he crushed the device in his palm. The metal crumpled with a sharp crack before he slammed his hand down, splitting the table in two. The echo of splintering wood rang across the room as President Go's voice rang with restrained fury. He said he may be many things, but he wasn't so heartless as to doom an entire nation or an entire continent for the greed of one man. He made it clear he wouldn't let Matsumoto's ambition plunge all of Asia into chaos. The meeting ended without an agreement. Jin-Woo's involvement in the S-rank mission remained undecided, but time wasn't slowing down for anyone. As the night deepened, trucks moved quietly through the empty streets of Shinjuku, loaded with high-grade monocrystals. Their engines purred like whispers against the silence, unloading hundreds of thousands of tons of magical energy onto the desolate streets. The operation to contain the S-rank gate had officially begun. Overseeing it all stood Yuri Orlov, the formidable Russian S-rank hunter. Arms folded and expression stern, he surveyed the glowing stockpile. The quantity was staggering, more than enough to construct a magic barrier of unprecedented scale. Confidence laced every movement as he paced the perimeter, mentally drafting the massive magic circle he was about to engrave. Yet despite the perfection of his plan, something gnawed at him. Something didn't sit right. His instincts flared, warning him of a presence lurking nearby. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the shadowed streets in search of the disturbance. Without missing a beat, he called out, demanding that whoever was hiding reveal themselves. But the silence that followed only deepened the tension. The Japanese personnel standing nearby exchanged confused looks. He finally muttered that it was probably just nerves. Who would be foolish enough to linger near an active gate with a dungeon break looming? But Yuri cut him off sharply. He clarified that he never said it was a person he sensed. What he felt was different. Something far beyond mere human presence. Something unnatural. And indeed, from atop a high-rise across the district, a hooded figure stood motionless. His gaze was locked on Yuri, eyes half hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. It was Sung Il-hwan. He watched the preparations unfold, knowing full well that everything was falling into place, just as it had been destined. The tragedy that had been set in motion was finally beginning to unfold. Back on the ground, the air around the gate had grown dense, humming with volatile energy. The Blade Guild's S-rank hunters stood at attention, weapons ready, nerves taut. They were strong, but even they knew they were facing something far worse than anything they'd seen. Meanwhile, the man at the center of the mission, Yuri, brimmed with confidence. If everything followed his plan, he was certain he could handle the S-rank gate alone. He pictured himself going down in history as the hunter who cleared it single-handedly. Still, in the back of his mind, he acknowledged there was someone even more worthy of that recognition. Smirking, he brushed the thought aside and casually took a sip from his flask, asking how many S-rank hunters were currently on standby. The personnel informed him there were only 15 S-rank hunters on standby, hardly the crowd Yuri had hoped for to witness the spectacle he was about to deliver. With mild curiosity, he asked whether the United States had dispatched any of their elite hunters to support Japan, but the response was clear. A new S-rank gate had opened in Maryland, with similar occurrences in England and India, leaving their top hunters stationed in their own countries. Just as their conversation continued, the personnel's expression shifted. His eyes widened in terror as he noticed something horrifying unfolding right in front of him. The dark barrier at the gate's entrance began to dissolve, cracking apart like shattered glass. An ominous silence fell over the area as hunters and military personnel turned their eyes toward the gate, only to freeze in place. What they saw defied their expectations, an unimaginable threat spilling into their world. A thunderous tremor rolled through the earth, followed by a heavy thump that shook the ground. And then came the monsters. They emerged one after another. These were no ordinary creatures. They were giants. The S-rank gate had opened. That wraps up the Double Dungeon arc. Stay tuned for part 3. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part when it drops. I'll see you in the next one as we dive into a brand new chapter.